where is Andrew Carlson?
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there.
Lake Chelan.
Okay.
Oh, nice. We're live to the world.
I know, and we could just go ahead and be
Whole
live because
world.
East of West 10, or should we wait for Nathan Butcher? And there he is. We don't need to wait. There he is.
I thought we had a mic.
We
there
do.
He is. He's right in the middle for me.
He's the middle Brady.
Yeah. He just looked like an East of West cover.
It's often been said.
Hey, everybody, we did it. We did it.
We're done.
Did it.
Yeah.
It's over, but also like we're all here together at the end.
Yeah, which is more than a lot of these folks in the East of West world can say.
More than I expected survived.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Yeah.
I actually expected a higher body count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so did I.
Definitely.
So
It had a lot more hopeful ending than I was expecting.
Except it also had the sort of extreme, like, this was good for 1,000 years or so, but then everyone died and it all fell apart again, because that's just the way of things. So it's like a little extra nihilism at the end of your happy ending.
And it definitely seemed like the art, like last volume, was better than a lot of the other volumes, especially the coloring.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But maybe that's because this is just 4 issues and it took them a long time to come out. 3 issues. 3 issues?
3.
43,
I think it's
44,
only
45.
3.
Holy moly.
But they're big issues. They're long.
And big things happen.
Big things happen. Yeah, I went on a real emotional roller coaster. I had read the first 2 issues of it yesterday before I saw Django. And I was like, oh, Django just got to the part where Death loses his other eye, and like, as someone who's just hoping that relationship comes back together, like, it's gonna feel so good when they get back together, but they don't get to see each other, so it's still true. He just doesn't have oh no, like, just
Yeah.
the whole last issue was like, oh dang, you built me up just to let me down, baby.
I wonder how much of that was Hickman's plan, like the wording, and like, was that a red herring that he wanted to plant? Did he want a book club to discuss that? And then
Did he think that you were going to look for that live technicality?
Yeah.
Leaving his options open.
But then the kind of poetic resolution as well with Babylon at the end, that it does kind of work out in that regard.
And the sort of poetic experience of this book sort of being about the message and the word and people either, fighting destiny-ish, or, is it not real or not? And then to have the experience at the end of like, oh wait, so I've heard they're not going to see each other again, but are they going to see each other? So it makes me, the reader, still be trying to fight against the idea of a prophecy that, even though I'm not in the story, doesn't affect me, but still affects my emotional center of the story. I thought was an interesting way of making the reader experience a similar thing to the characters.
I have an interesting way, self-proclaimed interesting way to start us off, to ask an unanswerable question. At least I think it's unanswerable. Now that we're at the end and we know the entirety of the content that was in this series, if you had to describe to somebody what it's about, but it's in between, science fiction dystopian, not that short, but not like a full-on 30-second elevator pitch, and you only had like 5 seconds, 10 seconds.
Listen, I used to do this almost every day at the comic store.
All right. Professional Boren.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the far, far future.
That
was less than 5 minutes. Well, or 5 seconds. Well done.
It's on a bumper sticker, man.
I think, like, having only read the first couple of issues this originally and having sold it quite a bit since then, I think my elevator pitch is still pretty close to the same, which is what you just said, but also sort of embedded in a deep, rich political tapestry as well.
Maybe I'd add versus politics after the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
You have to bring the Wild West, because, geez, it's derivative of that.
Yeah, I would say the 5-second elevator pitch is Death rebels against the rest of the horsemen of the apocalypse and is a future cowboy.
Nice.
The future cowboy, yes. One of my favorite subgenres.
Emily, were you saying that you have to include the Wild West or the Wild Wild West? Because that's 2 very different things.
Let's go with Wild Wild West. So it's a better theme song.
And there's
Turn
the
the head.
Wiki Wild Wild West.
Turn the head upside down.
I'm curious, like, what did everyone think about the end? Is there anybody that was disappointed? Is there anybody that was kind of blown away by it?
I loved it. Yeah, I also really loved it. I mean, definitely like was not expecting any of the chosen to make it out alive, to be honest.
And they kind of left the world in a much better place than I would really thought it was headed. That was kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which out of the original chosen,
I think
just
the
have
only
John
one,
Freeman.
yeah, it's just John Freeman, and he's like now serving like as an advisor or something to Wolf.
Yeah.
Will, you were saying something?
I mean, it kind of ended exactly the way that I was hoping it was going to end, because the most, for me personally, and I think it's been different for everybody, but for me, I've had the most fun reading this when it's focusing on the characters that I care about the most, I'm excited about most, which is, Babylon, Death, and, the whole family, and even the Four Horsemen. And so there was a lot of that and a lot of, resolution with those characters. And I was frankly really glad that it didn't, I felt like it closed enough of the loop on the message, but that's the stuff that kind of loses me a bit sometimes in the mud. And so the fact that they did enough of that to make it, it interesting and compelling and close that up, at least for me, the main focus of the book was, what happens with Death in the family. And I thought they executed it perfectly. I couldn't have been happier with the way that it did, with the focus on the characters and not the mythology.
I think that is a really good point, that there was so much of the message was a central part of the story, but the resolution and end of the story was more character focused. And, there wasn't, I don't know what necessarily answers would have come out of the message, but, it having a galvanized, definitive nature and relation to everything else, like, was a little a tangential thing to just the heart of the story being the characters, and that being the resolution of it all.
Do we think that the message is going to loop?
Well, I'd say the message, the theme at the end is definitely very much, that was the message. Now we're writing our destinies anew. Mm-hmm. That was our destiny being, written out in advance for us. But now the apocalypse has happened. The message is resolved. We can write our own destiny. They literally start doing that at the end.
Let's begin again.
The fact that it all falls again in 1,000 years, I could see that being a thing that happens all over again, given the fact that this is what did the Horsemen say was their, second time bringing about Armageddon. So if it all happens again in 1,000 years, I felt like that could easily be a little plot to West of East, when Hickman wants to write another one in 10 years and do a follow-up story 1,000 years from now.
Mm-hmm. All based in Massachusetts.
Yes.
We could only hope.
So if I could give my kind of super vague thoughts on it, I was very happy, and more happy than I thought I would be with the actual action of the ending.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just showing the carnage of the three horsemen in that one shot, like that,
so cool.
I could not have expected something that good. On the contrary, I would like to utilize the 7 of you to make me like the other version of the conclusion better, because I felt a little bit let down, especially considering who Jonathan Hickman is, in the plot of it all. It didn't feel as much of like there was a wow factor to me, and I want to know if I'm maybe missing something, or if I was really just supposed to tie it so much better to that First Corinthians passage of love that he put at the end, and then leave it at that. Who liked that side of it better, and who's gonna help me not be disappointed with the kind of the plot element ending.
So the end, other than just the big fights.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there. It is wrapped up fairly quickly, and in a way that isn't like a dramatic, sudden, climactic finish.
Mm-hmm.
If they just ended on Death dying or something, that would just leave you going, what what? You just ended it there? Okay. But instead it's a more placid, I always feel like these endings have a certain weird emotion to them. It feels a bit more like true life, and that gives it an uncanny feeling, in that there isn't a sudden climactic resolution to everything. Everything just keeps kind of going on.
It's like David Simon's show, where it's just like, well, that's not how a story is structured, but I believe that this is a real thing that's happening.
Right. It's so like it tends to always be, this feeling always tends to be in fiction, and it always tends to be around sunsets as well, for some reason. That just sums up the feeling very well. That kind of feeling that you have in real life when you're out in red sunsets and you're kind of hyper aware of reality and the time passing. That's the kind of feeling we get there with them just kind of sitting, relaxing after all of this stuff has happened, and it's just like, well, things are just gonna keep happening now.
And I'd also say that like Hickman is a writer that like really tickles my analytical fancy. Same with like Grant Morrison. And I think that like the things that I most proactively approach in my life are things that do just that, sort of tickle my analytical fancy. And with this book, it would be things about the message or the political sphere of everything, or sort of meta text or things like that. But I also think that like my total desire to be engrossed and challenged analytically is sort of kind of a defense mechanism for the fact that I am at my core generally pretty emotionally driven. And I think Django would say that as well. Like I think and talk a lot, but I mean, I'm pretty boiled down to like pretty basic emotion stuff a lot of the time. So this book kind
basic to you. I'm mystified by it.
It kind of, I appreciated the duality of this thing because it had a really strong heart and a weird analytical, like a challenging and awesome analytical thing as well. But at its end, for all of the analytical trappings of it, I would have liked some more answers about some other things perhaps, but I am at the end of the day, that emotional thing. I think it would be harder to land the big analytical ending of the answers and make it all fit, but it can, he didn't necessarily need to bring that up for this sort of, for the absolute sort of emotional resolution that I got out of it. Yeah, it is a thought.
I have a comment and a question. My comment was, when I was reading it, I was a little let down by just everybody's dead on a field and then there's a shootout. But then I realized, like, I think it was the point was to show that it was senseless, like, especially when he's like, tell them I was great, tell them I was consequential. And they're like, yeah, whatever. So I kind of jived with that later. But my question was anybody surprised by anything? Because I did not find myself feeling super surprised, but I felt satisfied. Like, it was a satisfying ending.
I didn't, other than being a little bit disappointed that clearly Death wasn't going to see Jolin again, nothing really surprised me. I guess I was a little surprised that it turns out that this was like the secret origin of Speed Racer all along. When he takes his helmet off, you realize that he was Speed Racer under that thing this whole time.
Astro Boy. That was like Osamu Tezuka Astro Boy. When I saw that, I was sort of blown away by how.
Yeah. I think I was surprised that the like freaking inside of a placenta looking helmet that he took off didn't affect his face at all.
Yeah, I was expecting like scabs and baldness
and like it was like one or the other. Like, why was his face so perfect considering it was like, yeah, anyway. That was cathartic though, to see the like squelch of it come off.
Good word. You should write sound effects.
I was maybe surprised. I'm thinking I wasn't surprised by much either, but I was completely satisfied. But I was a little surprised that Mao's army was just completely decimated and she was the only one left standing. And then to do all of that only to have her basically rescued. Like, I don't know, I felt like that was going to go a little bit differently in some way or another, but to have her just completely destroyed and left with nothing and have to be rescued, that was a little surprising to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Demon Ex Machina. It's, yeah.
One thing
I was a little bummed that she was singled out that way. It was just a little too tidy in a world that usually isn't that tidy.
And that she didn't get any of the satisfaction of defeating what's his name? I'm already forgetting his name.
Colonel.
Yeah, Colonel Sanders. I mean, obviously the Texas Ranger guy got the revenge for his dog, but it was still like she was kind of tormented enough by him where I thought maybe she was going to get to have some participation in bringing him down, and she didn't really.
Yeah, but like, I don't think that there's anybody who could have killed Chamberlain that wouldn't have left somebody who deserved to kill him out.
He was basically Caesar at this point. Like everybody's like, let's go stab that guy.
Yeah.
But that guy lost his dog, so he got first shot. Just
he got to go all John Wick.
Thinking about that, oh, please, Andrew. Yeah.
I was the tiniest bit disappointed. I don't feel like we had a very clear understanding of why Death changed color and no one else. That was the one thing I was a little bit.
Who's by cows?
I think it's mostly symbolic and therefore doesn't have to be, scientifically explained or whatever.
Yeah, the scene of him sort of the color draining out.
Right.
And
one of you guys said like it was like the darkness leaving his body, and I took that as a really great I don't know who said that, you take credit for it, but I thought that was a really great explanation when that happened. So that's what I accepted as the answer.
It could have also just been like, this is what happens when one of the horsemen breaks from the others. Right? Because like we never saw the other ones kind of disband, and maybe if they were to do the same thing, they would drain out too.
I can't help but kind of always think about, the person sitting at the laptop at 3:00 in the morning, writing the story when reading a story like this. And so, to that point, or even just sort of our feelings about the ending of this whole thing, I think the Hickman is intelligent enough to sort of know that I think a story lives longer and feels a little bit more personal to the reader when not all of the questions are answered, because then there is still this thing that you do in your head of like, oh, maybe this is what happened, and that kind of it becomes your own at that point. And I think in looking at different Hickman stories, I can't actually think of any Hickman ending that is like does tie it up. And I think that he kind of does consciously dangle the carrot on the stick of like, there's going to be answers at the end of this, and it's like, bam, no emotional resolution, but none of the answers, like not none of the answers, but that's a thing that I think goes with him. And it seems to be like kind of the smart person at 3:00 in the morning wanting to make sure he's going to be able to feed his family for the next 10 years off of this.
Jeff, think of the ending of Secret Wars, though. I mean, without saying anything in case one hasn't read it, but like that was a thing that was in 100% surprising. And even like the ending, but not the very last page, but like the ending was surprising. And then the very last page was like its own surprising reveal. And there wasn't like, I could give you things I'm surprised about, like how I'm surprised that Xiaolin, was surrounded. Like you see those amazing 2 9-panel grids of just like carnage, and then she's surrounded. It doesn't make it. Oh, that's surprising, but that's not last page of Secret Wars surprising, or like huge reveal surprising like we're used to in media. And I don't think I need that necessarily, but it is interesting. Whoever Emily asked that of like, no, I don't think so. Like, sure, like whether someone lived or died is fine, but there was so much precedent in this book for not really holding on to anyone too tightly. So, the horseman transforming, maybe that counts for me because that was rad.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And like that one panel when like War just like it's like the like weird perspective of like the bulging eyes and like just completely losing their shit.
Bulging
so
eyes.
Good.
A lot of bulging eyes in these 10 volumes.
Yeah, the top panel there.
Yeah, exactly. Also just kind of eyes in this volume in general.
Yeah, I loved in that fight just like the small detail stuff of just this being supernaturally awesome beings fighting each other. The arm chopped off with the hat. The 5
so cool.
bullets that slice through the tentacle.
Also so cool.
Is
wielding
so
a
cool.
sword with the tentacle thing.
Yeah, but well, and the thing I couldn't have, like, the thing I could have done without was the conquest scorpion butthole.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Why was that there?
I almost took a picture and sent it to Django because I knew it was
it
like
was
the
just
highlight
like,
of the book for him.
It was like, oh, cat butthole. Okay.
It's a cloaca.
It totally felt like a cat. You're right.
Oh.
Like nobody understands why that thing is there, but it is never not.
Think about the scripting. All right, Nick, make sure the butthole is pronounced.
Center of panel, butthole.
I think almost it's more interesting if this was a choice that Dragotta made.
Yeah.
Surprise. I really love the
like
just
maybe
the shoes.
The script just said Hickman saying, "Surprise me."
Yeah. I love just the shoes.
Oh, yes.
Like we don't see any of that action. It's just something that happened while we were looking away.
On the creepy upper body strength crawling.
Yeah, just crawling towards.
Who is the most qualified among us to decide which of those kills was the most awesome? Not me.
I mean, if we have like an apocalypse
Judge.
expert.
I like the parallels.
When are you okay with choosing for us? Which one was
No,
the best?
I want to hear what Mike has to say.
Okay.
I like the parallels in these panels with Xiaoling's fight as well.
Yeah.
So I you know me, I'm looking for the symbology and everything. So like the fact that the first blow is a gut shot to Famine, for example, I liked. And
I vote for Foom.
I like the thunk and the eyeball.
Yeah.
Right there.
Mike, the art of those like
it's the aftermath of Foom.
brutal shots. I really liked how throughout this series we've seen that art representation progressively more as it's gone on, but it really felt like in this final volume all of the fights kind of climaxed with those silent red and black panels with the motion lines, and I really just liked, I don't know if that was intentional or like, 13 issues ago they were like, well, that looks really good, let's just keep doing that, but I really liked the way that artistic through line climaxed at the end of this.
It works. It wasn't overdone. It's a really effective visual method of conveying the action, and
I was super excited when we saw the horsemen transport themselves through an underground tunnel that people don't get to use. I thought that was really interesting.
And we got precedent for the horsemen being together meaning something and one being apart, maybe not. So that could play into that too.
Yeah.
There's just so many good points of dialogue in this. I only remember where it looked like in a page one was, but I was like, I almost sent a picture of it to Nathan.
I know, like one of the pieces of dialogue I really loved was with Chamberlain when Xiaolin is getting away, and let me see here, what is it? I thought killing her slow would be the worst thing I could do to her, but now that I ponder my predicament in a more thorough fashion, let her live with being a queen of nothing. It suits her.
So do you think that
was so cutting?
Was that cutting, or was that him just not able to admit that his plan didn't work?
Yeah,
I mean that too. I feel like it's both. It's like cutting,
sure.
but also him wanting to deny the fact that he's not getting what he wanted.
Yeah.
She has some of the most honorable traits of anybody in this book. I mean, weird stuff too, but like calling her a queen of nothing to me was like exactly the magnitude of being worthy of pointing out, like Wynn said, but I think it meant just as much the I don't know, ineptitude ultimately of Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Especially because it's like, and it's like the next scene when Texas Ranger gets him.
Yeah.
Did Texas Ranger think that John was already dead? Is that why he said that Chamberlain was the last one or whatever? Or that, that was the last one?
Yeah, he thought that John was dead because he ended up shooting one of the brothers.
So that's interesting. Do we think that matters at all? That technically speaking, like John
like a week later
chosen? Like
he
what?
failed. Oh shit, John's around.
He sees a picture in the newspaper and is like, "What the hell?"
He's next to Wolf, just going, "Hi."
I mean, that's assuming that he had any reason to keep going, because it seemed like quite the suicide quest. So
He
I was
did get shot.
peeking to see if he was like at Armistice. I don't even know why he would be, but that would be kind of the next story beat where he'd show up, and he's not. So I guess he just walks off into the sunset.
Which is more than we can say for death.
And we don't see Doma Lux again, who was like one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Knowing that the last issue was her last showing, like, totally makes sense, but I just kind of assumed she'd show up again.
Yeah, she was just like, no, leave me and my wife alone.
Significance is measured solely by how deep
I'm happy for.
What is it, Jeff?
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to. I was just significance is measured solely by how deep your boot sinks. Density, the Chamberlain line.
Yeah.
You know, did you leave your mark on the world? I that was the one that I almost sent to Nathan, because it's just, and he goes on a little bit after, but I just think that it's such a weird power statement at the end of his life, and yeah, I don't know.
It's a legacy statement that to me is that's just the beauty of Hickman. Like, if you wanted to really absolutely dilute what Jonathan Hickman can do at its finest, it's saying like, oh, here's a thing that he made a character right that basically is the same thing of like, leaving a legacy is the most important thing. And that sentence means nothing. It's a total platitude. And then Chamberlain saying that, it's like, oh, dang, like, I feel that, whatever that is. I don't know a person like you that exists, but now I feel like I know you. And I thought that was sweet.
Yeah, too bad any sort of footprint can, of course, be worn and washed away.
And I think, like you said, Nathan, even just like him, that's kind of Hickman distilled down. I think that's a big theme in kind of all of his work, is like a guy screaming into the void, hoping he's going to be remembered. Like, legacy is such a huge thing, like Through Line, Nightly News, Fantastic Four, Manhattan Projects, like all of these things that seem to be sort of a person's enduring attempt to be remembered within the stories, but the stories themselves sort of feel like that.
Yeah, generally.
I totally didn't remember he wrote Manhattan Projects till right now. That would have like given a little different cast to this when I was thinking about that.
That's his take at humor. That one.
It's a very weird funny. It's funny, but it's like weird funny.
That's one I still want to read all of. I've read the first 2 volumes, I think. But okay, so my little disappointment, I think, was I wanted a little bit more of Chiveo and like what he was sticking around for.
The why.
The ultimate kind of why of that. And he was, you know, whispering in his ear, which, of course, according to my theory on the eyes, Chiveo was ultimately who killed Bell Solomon.
Because he asked the question.
Because he asked the question.
I was thinking about you, and I was just going pages back. There was someone who died later on in there. Oh, it was when the cop dude. But or anyway, there was a line. I was like, wait, is that a question? Where did Chamberlain miss because he hadn't asked a question? Was my
Chamberlain had asked a question, but yeah, the
Walker Texas Ranger did.
Walker Texas Ranger hadn't asked a question up until after the shootout. And it seemed like has crawled off of the gun at that point, and then he says any last words. But Bell didn't ask any questions, but Chiveo did.
And then Chiveo blames Bell for killing him.
Yeah.
I thought it was. I enjoyed that scene because the whole time it seemed like Chamberlain was trying to get the Ranger to ask a question. Like all he's doing is stalling and waiting for the guy to slip up. But that was pretty cool.
He doesn't need to know anything from Chamberlain. He has no more questions. He just wants him to die.
Right.
Yep.
I like that.
Meanwhile, Chamberlain is. The question is whether or not even Chamberlain was really aware of the full effect of, because he asks questions, and that's why he ultimately dies. Well, I liked as well the parallel with the 2 eyes, the 2 prophets' eyes. Both die, and both die like before they can finish their last rhyming couplet. Before they can finish their last little piece of prophecy or whatever. And the not questioning eye,
the one that was in Death's pocket.
Yeah, the one for answers sees it coming, but it still gets cut off short.
It's just like, oh, it's different for you. Oh shit.
Yeah, like I like the way that was. Yeah, because he says, "What we'll call it a day," or "I'll call it a day," and the day gets cut off. And the question is trying to make Walker Texas Ranger question himself by asking questions, and of course that's not going to work.
He's just like, no, I'm going to shoot this guy in the face.
Shut up.
What did y'all think of the Oracle inclusion plot situation?
I loved her line of, "I've always hated my old eyes because I knew they weren't the eyes I was going to end with." Like, that's a great line.
Yeah,
I think you kind of needed it because she was in the beginning, like you needed kind of that bookend.
And plus, I feel like she was just along for the ride because these people had screwed her over in like the worst possible way, and she just wanted to see them all die.
With anybody,
it was kind of interesting to have like a Oracle prophecy type entity who wasn't actually related to the message. It was kind of a different force. It made the world feel a little bigger. I kind of felt like that everything's not just the message. There's other forces.
Because there's a line in there that like the reason they came after her is because they were offended by her prophecy.
Yeah.
I got an art question for you guys.
Yeah.
Did anyone else feel like the art on this page looked a little different? With specifically with this, maybe like the outlines or something, there was a certain cartoony element to it that I'm not sure if I was supposed to feel or if there was something different about it. I don't know.
Those characters, like all of the white and even the Oracle's blue, like don't seem to have shading on them. They're all flat colors, where it's even on the other page, like there's actually shading put into it.
It's like it just didn't get to the shading part or something of the characters.
I really love, I mean, just this volume had a lot of like just statements that kind of caused me to stop and sit with for a little bit. But the statement about war and her relationship with death, and just the whole bit about some people don't get over things, like some problems you live with for so long that you start to love them, and like some things you can't get over, and you hold on to them. And I think that that's just like a really kind of powerful statement about humans. But I also thought it was kind of cathartic because I think most fiction portrays that as something you should overcome. And this doesn't even say that you shouldn't overcome it, but it does explain the fact that like I think everyone has something that they hold on to and aren't able to move beyond. Like our consciousness forms around it.
That was one of my favorite scenes when I kind of loved that aspect of it. Like it seems so petty when it's like these eternal beings, but yeah, I loved like little Babylon, who's this weird tactical genius, being like, "Oh, I figured out how you can win. You just have to say sorry and be friends again." And Ward's like, "Nah, that's not gonna happen.
You have to apologize and give me back.
Yeah,
everything will be fine for you guys.
Nothing will ever go wrong with that plan."
But then, as a kind of interesting kind of counterexample, I was just about to talk about my possibly the thing that surprised me from the earlier question, like what surprised you in this, Balloon's kind of redemption arc.
Totally.
Yeah. Right at the end.
And that he acknowledges right at the end that he's been following his programming. He can't not follow his programming, but he wants to work around it. That is very much someone who's literally programmed to behave a certain way, overcoming that and kind of overcoming the force of destiny upon them. And that death works out really well.
Death's statement of being like, you know what you have to do. And I like that was to the reader, or at least to me, an ambiguous thing. Like, I've got to take him to Xiaolin, or I have to do this. And the fact that Balloon knew, or at least Balloon's interpretation of what it was to admit and take the mask off. I just loved that didn't need to be spoken between Death and Balloon.
Well, and because of what we've seen of Balloon so far, you have the worry about like, okay, that could be something really dark. That could be Death knowing that, there's something that Balloon has calculated that like he needs to kill Babylon or something, that, or some dark purpose. But instead, it's an actual appeal to Balloon's morality. That again, as a piece of technology, we wouldn't normally, and everything we've seen so far about it being this amoral processor. We wouldn't expect that.
Not super different from somebody who just believes the message wholeheartedly.
Right.
Man, Balloon's redemption scene was one of those scenes that I don't, for as good as this book was, I don't think we had a lot of those scenes, that those things that you do in comics where you're...
Oh, I think he's frozen and not just thinking.
I think Balloon is making us think that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Balloon's like description of like just the ambiguous, like, well, I was supposed to show you how things. Oh, hey Nathan. Sorry, you froze for a bit there.
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead and continue on.
No. I was just trying to, give us something until you came back.
Oh, sorry.
But we did miss most of what you said, and I want it.
Okay, so like when you read comics, there's that thing you do all the time where you read the page in front of you, the left page, but you're trying to not look at the right page because you don't want to get the reveal, and you're like each panel you're trying to zone in on because it's like you want to take it the way it's supposed to be. East of West, you don't get that often, but I did get that when I thought Babylon was going to kill Xiaolin. And that felt the right kind of tense in comics, and I loved it.
Yeah. I had one of those where I skipped 4 panels as well, and I don't remember what it is now, but there was a thing where I was like, oh, I got to skip panels. I got to know, did someone just die? But I forget what it is.
I was really impressed with the fact that he was able to write war tactics over the course of one issue that I was able to follow and be tricked by and entertained by, because a lot of times when you're in the middle of a big battle, I don't track that stuff super well. And I thought he did a really good job of telling us why everything was happening and why, who was in danger and from what.
Absolutely.
Oh, in the war sequences, my favorite new character is Officer Shouty in Chamberlain's base
Rex
or vessel
Shouty.
Or whatever. The guy with the big beard who just shouts all the time.
I really, really loved the scene after like Xiaolin's getting defeated and her hand gets cut off and she's just wrecking face everywhere. And then the guys turn around and in their helmet reflections, you can see Booer just like crashing across the field.
Yeah.
I really loved that amount of detail that he put into it.
So on that note, just another butthole observation.
Oh,
he does
please.
not have one. So the fact that he came from Conquest and doesn't have a butthole, and then Conquest had it, like I don't. That doesn't track.
There can only be one.
Bauer came from Ezra
Orion,
but through
Conquest,
a thing
right?
but through Cheveo. Cheveo was summoning stuff, wasn't it?
Well, I thought it was interesting that they basically turned into the same type of beast. I think in the flashback in the last volume, and then again in this one, similar kind of beast. So I thought there was at least some consistency that this type of beast is related to Conquest in some fashion.
True.
To jump back a second, so I really enjoyed the little bit of conversation we had about Chamberlain's death, and I really liked the idea that he questioned and then was shot, because I think that like just who Chamberlain as a person is someone who doesn't question or necessarily think about, like, it's just total confidence in their own bullshit and doesn't necessarily worry about anything else. So as soon as they actually start questioning, that's when they would fall. I'm looking through here. Was there actually like a direct question that was posed, or is it just the fact that he like morally seems to be questioning something?
I think it's all symbolic for him starting to doubt himself. Now that he's exposed, he has nothing else backing him up. It's going into like after
the
beginning of the issue. After a blank page anyway, the first thing he says is, so shall we just get it on?
Right.
It starts off with a question. And it's again, he's prevaricating, he's trying to draw the whole thing out as long as possible and manipulate the situation.
Right.
So he asks like near enough a question every like 3 or 4 panels. So what's it going to be, Belle? Shall we together dispatch this relic and put the past behind us?
Right. And as soon as he doesn't have certainty, that sort of implies something else, right? Like he no longer has it, or his plan is to, and so yeah, I really like that. I think there's a real sort of moral justification of all of that. Like Chamberlain stopped being Chamberlain right before his death and was living a question. And then I also think that if you're gonna draw a shootout between two people, a shared sound effect of blam connecting the bullets is another bit of incredible cartooning.
And I loved, just in terms of a panel layout.
Yeah.
Those 3 panels with the blam traveling
I
between
stopped on
the
that
gutters.
One too. Yeah, good call out.
Great bit of cartooning.
I also loved the panel with Cheveo overlaying Belle.
That's an amazing panel.
It was very good.
I don't know that it matters if Chamberlain asks questions, though, right? Because he's the one who's got the question eye on his gun.
I think it's a symbolic thing.
It's a symbolic. It ties in with like the word again, kind of. It's
okay.
It's the phrase "one for questions, but the questions bring death."
Right.
Which initially, like, when you first hear that, it's kind of like, oh, okay, so you need to be careful of its advice. If you're, the one that gives you answers will just give you answers and allow you to, because that's the one that the bounty hunter guy was using to track down people, because he had this eye that could just give him straight answers about, where can I find this person?
And he's the conniving
questions nobody knew what to do with. But Chamberlain figured out a use of it.
Right.
And it was within that kind of loophole of, don't ask it questions because questions will bring death.
Right.
And he didn't, as someone who is kind of betraying everyone and has his own singular, quiet, secret motive, like to have your own motive, what you're doing at all times, which is almost to say you don't have any questions because you're the only one who knows the answers of your own actions.
Right.
Or the why of it. So as soon as he starts asking questions, even though it was sort of like buy time and things, it seems almost like a betrayal of this character of someone who doesn't really care about any of the answers that anyone else says. So what good is a question, because he knows what he's doing.
Right.
And it seemed like when that was thrown into question, that's when he died.
That's a lot less literal than the eye makes you shoot people who ask questions. They're a lot less literal.
When you're dealing with prophecy and stuff, the kind of the literal kind of blurs and merges into the metaphorical, because you have metaphors that are, by all appearances, affecting reality. But it's a chicken and egg thing, because is the metaphor just describing what is happening in reality, or is it vice versa?
Yeah.
So do you think I'm processing this all right now because I didn't get any of that, and I was actually going to ask that question of like, why did Chamberlain miss? And so you're kind of answering it for me. But do you think that Chamberlain talking as much? I mean, he's obviously very verbose in general, but talking as much as he is an attempt to get the Ranger to talk and ask a question, and he is just sitting there quietly, and just the most he can say is, or you could talk me to death, and that's all he got out of him. And so because he couldn't get anything out of him, he lost, and he didn't ask a question.
Well, that, and he's trying to use Belle as a distraction. He's trying to convince Belle to shoot the Ranger, so that the Ranger will draw on him, and then he can manipulate and he can use that opportunity to shoot the Ranger. But it doesn't work out like that.
That scene, I just loved how incredible an amount of weakness Chamberlain showed while he was still posing as the same character that he has been the entire story. And from saying out loud, what are you going to do, stand there and not say anything, or whatever the version of that was, and trying to get him to say more, and then completely kind of misnaming Xiaolin by calling her the Queen of Nothing, which is just nonsense. And I don't know, I loved his arc. I think has turned out to be the one that maybe not my favorite, because that's still Babylon Speed Racer. It's just the one that I think was developed with the most completeness. And
it reminds me of, I was watching a video today that was like a more political observation video, but the observation being made in it was that narcissists, people with narcissistic personalities, are at their core completely aware of how insufficient they are, how insignificant they are, and that knowledge informs all of their behavior. So all of the bravado, all of the supposed sureness, that front is all, a pearl built over the grain of dirt that is an awareness of one's insignificance.
Back off.
Oh, I wonder what
Django,
political video you might have been watching.
Too close to home.
Yeah. I'm curious, Andrew, as someone who has built, notes of the timeline and looking at a lot of that stuff, which I read between, this last meeting of ours and this one, how do you feel about the amount of information given and sort of the context around it and maybe answers you were hoping for? As someone who maybe looked at that more than myself, did you get an appropriate amount of resolution from that? Are there more questions that you have from actually looking at that data? I'm curious, I like that you got into the data of it and started pulling things apart, from that perspective. Do you have something there?
I don't have anything deep to say, I'd say. But I really, really enjoyed how they were able to restart and be like, okay, we need to set new borders. Because, one of the biggest things I took from that timeline is there were a lot of country or whatever wars.
Mm-hmm.
They were constantly fighting over territory with each other. It was never a peaceful time, even before the horsemen arrived. So, I'm glad that it made me hopeful and kind of thinking of that kind of utopia, that they were able to break out of the dystopia into the utopia.
Mm-hmm.
And the other good thing to notice is how the destroyed elements of the former nations, the things that have been more or less completely destroyed, are Texas, the Union, and the Confederacy.
Uh-huh.
And what we have kind of leading this new era of, a new age are the Endless Nation, the Maoists, and the New Orleans Kingdom. So it's all, people of color that are leading this new America, which I appreciated. Yeah.
And the way that Wolf was like, well, I guess the nation also, by virtue of having conquered these other people, I guess we're the ones to make these. And we're the ones who have to make the decision. So we will speak on behalf of these countries or these provinces or whatever, and say that we are going to go for peace. But yeah, to that point of appreciated having the conquered nation now getting to reconquer the nation and have it be theirs. I really like the snake eating its tail there.
Yeah, and the reversal from what we the first impressions we got of the Endless Nation, which was this very isolationist nation with this advanced technology that only sold some of their technology to the other nations, to now them being the ones taking responsibility and leading the entire northern continent.
And that would, I guess, tie into sort of my one disappointment, which is not really a disappointment, but I would have loved to hear more about the explosion and the relationship between technology and the Endless Nation. Like whatever explosion had happened that they talked about in issue number 1 that seemed to be the catalyst for the derailment of the time stream seemed in my mind to be tied to this incredibly advanced technology. And while it isn't necessary to the story, because I can just say that's not what the story is about, I think it's a fertile soil with fungus gnats in it to be able to talk about, a cool story there.
So I can say that's part of the reason why I asked that question at the beginning of what do you tell someone that this is about? Because you could say that there are 25 different awesome things in this that it completely unapologetically avoids answering, like the coloring of the people, the origin of the horsemen, how often it happens, really even what happened at the very beginning, like with the whole prophecy stuff, it's kind of explained there, but there's all these offshoots that you would take and that isn't what it's about. And it's not necessarily about even solving the plot of what's there. Like this, I think this turned out to be, and I will be able to enjoy it more if I was ever to recommend somebody to read this. It turned out to be more of like a really good time and a crazy time. But it wasn't like Hickman's Fantastic Four reading through Avengers or something where you felt like you were trying to just like hang on to the boat the whole time. It's like there were just times that this was good. And that really, to me, an issue, I think it was 44, I think was the Valley of the Gods battle or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like that was done as well as any action awesomeness I'm just here to watch as the audience as I've ever read. Mm-hmm. And that issue and that scene to me is what a 10 is in comics. But I did not think, you know, a trade or two into this series, that's what I would be calling a 10 out of 10 from Hickman's East of West. I would figure it would be calling some plot resolution or explaining something that Mike brought up in issue 2 that he, you know, randomly guessed right from issue 40. And I don't know, like we had a lot of cool things in here that I don't think he felt the need to explore. And that would make me explain it to somebody differently.
Yeah,
after
it starts really misleading, I would say. Because that first, issue 1 was a challenge to get through and overly complicated to the point where I almost think that the book finishes less complicated. It almost seemed to me like maybe he responded to some criticism of it being overly complicated in the beginning. I don't know, or it's just the story he wanted to tell, you know, the whole time. But I would not have expected, exactly to your point, like some of the coolest action that I've read in any comics or, you know, seen in a lot of other mediums has happened in reading this, when, you know, probably a lot of people read the first issue or two and said, this is just too much for me, and put it down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In retrospect, it really feels like a book about relationships, which I really wouldn't have said back in. I would have been like overly complicated politics with scenes of violence, and it's totally a like people story.
Mm-hmm. And that's I think what I was sort of trying to get at, which I think the analytical thing is a carrot that Hickman hangs on a stick, and I think that more often than not is an illusion, because most of his things begin with the promise of I'm going to blow your mind and end with more of a character-based thing, which is not to say that like it's a disappointing ending or like, you know, I love the Secret Wars ending, but I think that he makes you think it's going in one direction, but he knows he can never, you know, it's like Lost. They're like, we're going to pose all of these questions, but we can't possibly answer all of them. And, you know, I think he knows an emotional core is kind of the thing that can live the longest, because once you have all the answers given to you, then that actually puts a period to the sentence. And it's maybe a thing that you don't think about 4 months down the road when a weird thing happens. You're like, oh, it's kind of like that scene that was never emotionally resolved to me. Also, can we talk about Game of Thrones? Anybody holding out on Game of Thrones spoilers?
Oh, God.
You're good.
For it.
I thought it was really interesting that the way that this ended kind of reminded me of the way Game of Thrones ended, which is like, well, let's set up a new political sphere. Like which isn't bad at all, but, you know, also like that issue came out probably not too long after all of that. And, you know, the idea that he started this journey with the end in mind of creating like, well, now we're going to create kind of democracy, or we're going to create everyone caring about one another. And I remember when Game of Thrones ended, I was like, oh, they made democracy, I guess.
To kind of point out maybe the kind of an example of what we probably might have been expecting as a resolution from this series based on like the beginning. What my mind keeps going back to is the last couple of pages of the way that Red Sun was resolved. Mm-hmm. The Grant Morrison Red Sun. Yeah.
Mark Miller. Yeah.
Mark Miller. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Like the way that was just so kind of well round. Yeah. Just that sort of explanation that just went, whoa, okay, this suddenly makes everything make sense.
Exactly.
And, you don't see it coming, but it's such a clever ending. And I think, what we're expecting was maybe more clever ending.
It's kind of to my previous question, like I wasn't really surprised, but also I realized I was kind of a blank slate going in, like except for having like really eyeball conspiracy theories and like the relationship and stuff. Like I realized I didn't actually have a clue what I thought was going to happen, and I'm really curious if anybody was like really set on like a certain sequence of events.
No, I mean going.
For me, thank you. For me, like kind of the only thing that I was really hoping for, and sounds like many of us did, was, you know, like, oh, there's gonna be some tricky, clever wording with they're never gonna see each other again, and we're gonna actually get that reunion. Even though, like, it was still awesome to get that moment between Xiaolin and Babylon at the end, it just like, that's what I wanted, but also like I also wanted her and Death to be able to like have a final moment, even if like, you know, their final moment in canon was actually like still really awesome.
Yeah.
And there's an implication that their final moment was the one that they shared via Babylon. That Death, you know, sets Babylon in his path to meet up with Xiaolin, and you know, her meeting with him is sort of the last gift and the last, you know, exchange between Death and Xiaolin.
And I
usually don't try to get like too hung up on like making up my own endings, but there is the fact that like Death isn't necessarily a person who can like stay dead, and so
I was looking for the final page.
He doesn't die in the valley.
That's true.
That's true. He falls off the horse.
And also, they don't resurrect quickly necessarily.
It wasn't like 50 years before they resurrected or something.
10, but yeah.
Yeah, they resurrected the other ones. Resurrected
it's gross too.
I was going to say, I suppose that would be one other disappointment I can think of, is that Babylon never got to see Death with his just plain eyes. He only had to see him through Balloon.
Although he did see him as his original self the whole time, right? He saw him as just like the black Death person.
Part, yeah, just as the black one. So like a reskinned. But just still being able to see the white pure version, I think, as you guys were saying, I really liked that read where it was like the evil, the darkness leaving him. So thinking about that now in context, I really like that.
I've got a thing on that, but Will, you've been waiting for like 5 people.
I was going to say, in retrospect, Hickman's kind of a dick for telling us so long ago that Death and Matt would never see each other again. I don't think I remember what I was to say. I think I was just gonna, you know, I mean, Jeff already said like it was like Lost, and maybe based off of everyone's reaction a couple of weeks ago, maybe me and maybe Django are the only ones who've seen Lost all the way through. But you know, endings generally are hard, and not a lot of people get it right. They struggle with endings, and I think, you know, most people who tell you they know the whole story mapped out all the way through from beginning to end are generally lying through their teeth, and they might have, you know, bits of the story in their head that they want to accomplish, but as they're writing it, they go, oh, I want to do this, oh, I want to do this, I want. That's why so many books you know, seem to get delayed indefinitely, right? Whether it's like Sex Criminals or what's Saga, you know, where they kind of run out of like steam on what to do with it. So I think it takes a lot of work to see it through, but to know that like most of the time they start out with these grand ideas of, you know, whether it was Lost or what this started with, and going all over the place and want to throw 1,000 ideas out there. And then when they get halfway through, they're like, why am I doing all of this? This is a story about the characters. And then they always write some long diatribe about how they want to take this book and focus on the characters. And so that's what it turns into. And I felt like that was a lot of this, was just, you know, turning it back on the characters and, you know, not focusing on the other stuff as much, because the characters is what we relate to the most, more than anything.
Yeah, and you're right. Ultimately, you know, when you start writing a story, you have the story in mind, but then you create the characters as you go along. The characters are created by the process of telling the story, but the characters are exactly who you're experiencing the story through, and who you have, you know, they're people caught up in the story. You have the most sympathy and the most connection with them.
Yeah.
So ultimately, they kind of take over the story in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Nathan, what were you gonna say?
So Babylon sees Death as the original self, just the black version of himself. Balloon's programming is to make Xiaolin look like a scary zombie monster. Is the black version of Death supposed to just be that scary, or was the Balloon's programmers supposed to not think that that's that big of a deal to see as like a normal dude? What are we doing here?
I mean, that is the version that we see of him, like when he's standing in the background while they're taking the prophet's eyes. So, I mean, seems like he was considered to be a pretty scary dude.
That's a great point. Mike, what were you going to say?
Did anyone else notice Babylon referring to War as her?
Yeah, I thought that same thing, even because...
So that made me think that, part of that kind of core balloon programming is showing, where everything's being shown as kind of horrible reverse versions of reality. The horsemen are being shown as their truest selves, because they don't show the horsemen as being like really nice, fluffy people or whatever.
They look pretty monstrous,
yeah, but not like overly ridiculously over the top monstrous, like like they show Xiaolin or
before they do their transformations and we get to see the cloaca.
Right, exactly. That stuff is more horrible than what Balloon is showing Babylon.
And yeah, I mean, I guess tying into that, and just before we get out of here, tying into the question of just like, what did we predict early on in this series that was going to happen at the end of this? And I guess I was stunned at what I thought was going to happen, because at the end of every single one of these sessions that we had, Django and I would meet up, and Django would say, Jeff, in the final volume, we're going to get a fucking butthole shot. He just kept saying it. And the fact that Django, I don't know how you did it, bud. You always do. You always seem to.
I mean, I think that's what we all want from our comics always, isn't it, Jeff?
Give me a volume 10 right there.
I've got a sixth sense, like a third eye for this thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a third eye, all right. You bail out of a series.
Which Batman omnibus is that coming up in, Jeff?
Oh, it's got to be a surprise.
Okay, this has been fantastic. Thank you, everyone, seriously, for getting us through all of this and for doing all of this. What is next, Django?
I guess we don't really know for sure. I think we'll take a couple weeks off and very likely be back in some sort of similar fashion, maybe with a little better planning ahead on our part, so we can choose books and order up rather than just kind of pillaging what the shop happens to have in stock on any given day.
Y'all have been so awesome about just being like, yeah, if you guys pick a book, we'll read it. And that is such a cool thing, and it puts us in just this awesome position. And we've been using that as a way of like, well, we have the first thing we've done is like, what do we have a ton of in stock right now that are actually worth reading in a way that a lot of people haven't read them. But we were talking yesterday, and I think with like an every other week schedule or something, we'll probably, instead of doing that, approach the idea from the vantage of what is something that we really want to read that we could just go ahead and order 15 copies of. And since you have all been really generous with your funds and just been like, if you say to read it, we'll read it and buy it. That's crazy and awesome. And we really, really appreciate that. So we're going to workshop some sort of idea about how to order things in a way that then gets it to people in a maybe cost efficient way, because you're being willing to just read a thing that we're choosing. We're trying to figure out a good way to do it, but I do think built into it is probably an every other week schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably start with East of West Volume 1.
Nathan, that book is out of print and is doubled in price. So
I've read like 5 issues in 2.5 weeks.
Yeah,
I got all the issues.
And I'm over here. I'm being silent about the one I want to read.
What is that?
What is it?
Guard.
What?
Old Guard.
Old Guard.
Yeah, I tried to order more copies of Old Guard today. And what has happened with that is the same thing that happened with Umbrella Academy, which is the same
they
thing
went
that
out
happened.
of stock again.
And no one printed a bunch of them before a television show came out. So as with like
come on.
Yeah.
Well, I guess like I do acknowledge a global pandemic happened.
No, there's no excuse.
That's not it.
Like, also, I would buy another copy of it if they put Charlize Theron on the cover.
100%. I don't even like those television covers, but for sure I would.
But yeah, like on the cover of everything, like East of West,
Charlize
Saga,
Yeah.
No, it happened
Charlize
with Boys
Theron
as
with
well.
an axe. What else?
You just can't, for whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure before long we'll be able to get it. But I even looked into it today, placing orders, and they are out of stock.
I'll just communally mail my copy around.
When we
I would love to read Flintstones as a group. Is all I said.
Oh my gosh, that one is so good.
That is a really good idea.
I have volume 2, but I haven't read volume 2. But volume 1's so good.
I would love to time the ending of Gideon Falls to read the end of Gideon Falls when that comes out in, what was it, December?
The television show?
November?
Is that the Gideon Falls?
Yeah,
Andrew posted a picture of, like, was it yesterday? Yeah, they just announced the ending of Gideon Falls in December, which I think is perfect. I've been pressuring everybody else to read volume 4 of Gideon Falls the last few days.
Now,
and
is it now available with word balloons?
I read it this weekend and it had word balloons. Unless I just thought it was artistic and I didn't miss them, but I doubt that was the case.
But we'll definitely get feedback from everybody before, picking a thing. Like, look for the Facebook thing. We'll make posts about it. It would be nice to have a direct channel to all of you. We'll probably even just email y'all, but would it be great to get some.
Do you have Facebook, Jeff?
So we'll just email everybody, or maybe I'll just make a podcast about trying to get a hold of everyone and distribute it.
I mean,
you guys were talking about writing a story.
Podcast just about.
I've done more foolish things. You guys were talking about
planning a book club.
You write a story and then you get halfway through it and you're like, what am I doing? I'm like, yeah, you start a podcast and you get 32 issues into it as an issue by issue podcast. And you start thinking, what the hell am I doing reading Batman again? But yeah, we'll get a hold of everybody.
I've made a huge bat mistake.
I've made a huge bat mistake and now I'm publicly committed. And it's swallowing my
podcast
life.
Batman.
But yeah, I mean, we've ended season 1 and we'll start season 2, but it has been an incredibly cool thing. I was talking on the podcast last night that went up today, just sort of like, what's the best stuff that we've done or read during quarantine? And what I realized is the most rewarding stuff that I've read have been these books that I'm rereading with all of you folks and East of West. And it's just been incredibly rewarding to read things I think are a really high caliber that I wouldn't normally reread, but getting to read it with other people. And then, going back on something I said earlier, just like today reading this volume, I thought of things that Nathan had said and then Wynn had said and that, Mike had said. And it enriched my reading experience to have all of your voices in my head while reading this thing. And I really value that experience now. You're all my collective fictional Cheveos. And, I look forward to having that be a thing in the future because it has been really, really cool. So I think, on behalf of both of us, we're really, really grateful for you guys keeping this going with us and giving us some sense of purpose when we were just two headless chickens running around without one 20 weeks ago.
And we did it.
Yeah, and likewise in return, I think, for a lot of us, I even just, having the mail order stuff has been fantastic. But just having that would have still felt kind of a bit lonely, that we're just kind of getting the comics delivered on our doorstep and we read them, and that's part of the quarantine thing, just sitting at home, reading stuff, watching TV. But being able to talk to people about it, more so than outside of quarantine and lockdown and stuff, has been fantastic. It's been something to look forward to every single week.
Well, this is our favorite part of having the comic store too, I think, is seeing people and hanging out with people. So
100%. And we want to make it so people who shop at the comic shop, the comics place, get to be a part of a community, even when there's a global pandemic. So,
good job, you guys.
Real important.
You're
Thank you.
doing
it's
it.
really your guys' superpower. And it's,
I was hoping for flight.
I mean, maybe flight is what you get in response to me saying that to you.
No, you don't want flight without superhuman durability as well.
That's true. It's just the bugs in the
Otherwise,
eye.
you just but I emailed this in
land.
response to it last week, but this has been such a recharge for me every week, especially we've had the side Facebook group going, but this last week was it was a week with a capital W.
Yeah.
There's a Facebook group?
We have
a
chat group.
Yeah.
Daddy Jeff is about to tear up.
I'll be on Facebook. I want to be a Facebooker.
I mean, we could just go over to Discord.
I don't know how to do that one either.
It's no different. It's just not run by something that's trying to actively degrade the system of democracy.
Listen, it's part of the message. Can't get away from Facebook.
But yeah, it was a big bright point at the end of the tunnel for my week this week was knowing that I was going to get to enjoy this last volume with y'all.
Well, we'll be back.
We'll be back.
We'll do this again.
And we'll do more number ones, unless we feel just a deep calling to get 10 volumes into something again. Sandman's long, right?
Sandman's pretty
long. Oh my
long.
God, I am working. I'm working my way through the audio adaptation of Sandman right now.
Just thumbs up or thumbs down.
And then remember,
you don't want me talking about Sandman.
Like 75%. I'll set it there. The Corinthian was interesting, but would not recommend listening to 24 Hours as an audio thing. Like, I thought it was awful as a comic, and then they made it an audio play, and I was like, oh God, why did I do this to myself?
Yeah.
Like, it's generally good. Like, they're doing an okay job, and Kat Dennings' death is delightful, but I'd say 75, it might be higher.
Okay.
If you enjoy Sandman. I have not ever actually finished it, so.
Me neither.
You think I've been bad on East of West? I speak too much about Sandman.
Okay, well, we'll put that one. We'll make sure we don't ever go there.
All right, I have to elevate my legs
for his bee stings
because I'm a big old baby bee sting boy.
Django, you're wearing the bee sting and poop shirt again.
I know. It's been a long couple of days.
Yeah, I hear that. All right, everybody.
I saw some of that. Anyway, have a wonderful night. I hope nobody melts.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks for everything, guys.
Have a good night, you guys.
See
you all
in a couple of weeks.
Bye.